All right, welcome everybody. My name is Kristen Biermeyer. I'm the marketing manager for Wagner CPAs, and I am so happy to have you all here today to learn more about the governance, operations, and trends for 501c6 associations. The presentation is being recorded today, and I will email the recording and the slide deck to you later today. If you have any technical issues during the webinar, I will include my email address in the chat. Feel free to reach out if you need any assistance. Adam will be leaving some time at the end of his presentation for questions, so you can submit any questions during the presentation using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Our presenter today is Adam Kuczynski, a CPA and Senior Manager in Wagner CPA's Assurance Department. Adam has worked on audits of several different tax-exempt organizations, but works primarily with 501c6 associations. And with that, I will turn things over to you, Adam.
Awesome. Thanks, Kristen. And happy to have all of you join us today and to learn more about associations and just the overall trends and operations that we're seeing with our association base. And I'll give a little bit more background about myself, but in a minute. But just to go through a quick overview of the plan for today, and this is built out in the invite as well. Want to touch on four main areas here today. Membership and conference trends within our association client base, systems modernization that our associations are going through, staffing trends in the role of governance, and then also briefly touching on lobbying that associations are conducting right now. And I will say that the lion's share of our time is going to be in bullet points 1 and 2 here, membership and conference trends and systems modernization, just because that does seem to be the most relevant piece that our associations are working through right now. For some background, and it's not on here, but I'll just to build off of what Kristen mentioned about my background. I am a senior manager with the firm, and I've been with the firm for 13, going on 14 years now, which sounds crazy saying out loud. And as Kristen mentioned, throughout my career, I've worked on a wide variety of not-for-profit organizations and have spent my entire career in the not-for-profit space. But over the last 7 to 8 years or so, as working primarily in our DC market, international market, I have trended towards the association space. And I don't know if I necessarily have a passion for associations, like someone has a passion for humane society or something along those lines, but certainly enjoy working with our association clients. And with that, I mentioned on the screen here, I work with approximately 40 associations annually, and that's on the audit review and compilation assurance side of the house. And with those associations in general, I'm working through their tax returns as well, and also too from a tax standpoint, working with well over 40 associations annually. And I know this presentation is geared towards 501c6 trade associations, but I also have included 501c3 membership-based organizations as well, because a lot of the trends and takeaways today that I'm going to talk through also apply to those membership-based organizations that are, collecting dues, hosting annual conferences, advocating for their members at a national level. So I am including them in that number 40 above. From a size standpoint, working with associations of a wide variety of sizes, as you can see here. Some with total assets as small as $300,000 on an annual basis, others at $20 million. From a revenue standpoint, as small as $100,000 annually to over $17 million annually. But I know that's a wide range, but I'd say for the most part, the associations that I'm working with are in the, from a total revenue standpoint, about $5 million or so in revenues, and those revenues being not just dues, it's dues, the conferences, publications, and so forth. And yet, from an asset standpoint, probably in that $7 to $10 million range is where we're seeing a lot of our associations land. And then, just real quick, I guess a quick qualifier disclaimer here for those of you working to maybe benchmark your association today based off of the call. You'll see a common theme throughout this is it depends. I'm drawing off my experience with working with those 40 associations annually, so that's where my knowledge base comes from. These trends that I'm speaking to come from, but there may be pieces that I'm touching on that don't apply to your association. But I do also feel as well that whether it's the revenue side, the system side, the staffing trends, you're gonna understand, at least a piece of the of how your organization relates to our organizations that we're working with, and hopefully take something away from it. So with that, I am going to just start on the membership and conference trend side. So membership dues and conference revenue. And when I'm referring to these numbers here, I am referring to the annual revenues, not necessarily membership count or conference attendee counts. But I will touch on that a little bit later on some, kind of, reading between the lines on what we're seeing with those counts as well. But just in general, with our association space, we're seeing, very mild growth or decline, just in general, flat membership dues growth on an annual basis or decline. And, there's not a specific reason for that. I think I list 5 different things here, and there's probably, 15 plus that are contributing to this. But, just to speak to some of it on what we're seeing within the association space, one, mergers and acquisitions. For our associations who aren't individual members, but may have a company membership, mergers and acquisitions throughout various industries are really impacting associations and their ability to grow. To give you an example, I work with a truck leasing association, and the way their dues are structured is if you have X thousand dollars of revenue, your dues are Y. If you have Z $1,000 of revenue at the next tier, your dues are higher, and so on and so forth. But they do cap their dues. And so when the U-Hauls of the world acquire a small mom and pop shop who decided to, sell their business, they're taking away membership from the association at the end of the day, because the small members no longer paying, and U-Haul's dues are capped because they're so big. So we are seeing some of that happening. To jump around a little bit, the information age and retirements, I think, are somewhat intertwined, but we do live in the information age. We're sitting on a Zoom call right now discussing this, and the World Wide Web is at our fingertips. And with that, a lot of good information to be found on the internet. Also, a lot of bad, but also there's that good piece that individuals coming up in various industries just aren't seeing the value that people saw in memberships 5, 10, 15 years ago, just because if they have an answer, they can Google something, or they can get a quick YouTube training video on a specific topic in a specific industry, and not necessarily seeing the value in a membership anymore. So there's that piece. And kind of along those lines, and I'll just skip a little bit to retirements. Baby boomers are retiring. They're retiring across all industries. Some industries are more impacted than others, but the population base just isn't, keeping up with the retirements. For every 5 boomers that retire, it's not like there's 5 millennials, 5 Gen Zers coming up to replace them. And so that's really impacting the membership bases at the associations that we're working with. To give you some additional examples there, I'm just thinking of the industry that I'm in, the accounting profession. The AICPA, we certainly have a talent shortage within the industry, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. But I believe the number was 75% of CPAs are either at or nearing retirement age. And I'm just thinking as the AICPA, our leading 501c6 trade association, that's something that they're certainly going to be and are currently reckoning with right now, is how to grow that membership base. And I'll touch on that a little bit more later on. But another professional services industry association that I work with is also going through something very similar to what the accounting profession is going through, and it's largely driven by retirements. The other piece, maybe back in the middle here, inflation, inflation and just overall sensitivity to the economy that we have seen that ebb and flow over the years, just as, and it also ties into that information age a little bit too, where it's like, I'm not going to pay my $200, $1,000, whatever the number is in dues. I'm just going to look it up online and just skip a year maybe. And then that skipping 1 year leads to skipping 3 years, 5 years, and that membership is gone. So there are some of those cost saving considerations at the membership level. But maybe I'll try and skip ahead to speak a little bit more on the positive side. This is all industry specific as well. So I mentioned a lot of the negative impacts, but we've also seen some associations that we work with really thrive and boom over the last 5 years, especially through the pandemic. And just to give you an example of how this can be industry specific, there's a payroll provider association that we work with that represents a lot of payroll providers across the country, and they've seen some very nice growth in their membership over the last 5 years. And the pandemic's part of that. There was a lot of uncertainty surrounding the CARES Act and ERC and just various payroll options and whatnot during the pandemic, and they really just jumped on it. Went through the legislation, provided a lot of value and education and information to their members, and they built a lot of loyalty with their members where they didn't just receive a COVID bump, they're still growing and doing very well. Similarly, an organization or an association that we work with that's members are full of community agency providers who provide after school and just general support to individuals with disabilities and needs. They were a leader within their membership base during the pandemic, and just providing all their members with options on how local laws, regulations, and whatnot are impacting them, what they can and can't do. And they've really boomed over the last 5 years as well. So it really is industry specific. And I think in general, as we walk into an audit, without even talking to management, without even looking at a single number, it's like, what is the industry in which this organization or association is representing? Who are their members? Like, what are the trends within the membership base? And from there, we can draw some pretty good conclusions before even seeing a number on what we're going to see within the financial statements. Another piece that really has impacted, membership as well is just the annual conference. So we have seen, and I'll transition then to the conferences piece, but we have seen some organizations over the last few years struggle with their membership, largely because the conferences struggled. The pandemic has certainly impacted that, but if the conference isn't doing well in Q4, and people aren't attending like they used to, it's also impacting membership, because that's when they put the full court press on to renew membership, really sell the value of the association. And so as those conference numbers, start to fall, so does membership. So those two are a little intertwined there, to say the least. Then from just a conferences overall standpoint, I do want to rewind, 5-6 years, we'll say, prior to the pandemic, on what we would see with associations in general. And overall, we would see an association take one of three approaches to its annual conference. The first two being the more common. One, they're going to have a conference that's going to generate a profit. So if we're going to have a $500,000 profit on this conference, that $500,000 is then going to support the programming throughout the rest of the year, or just general operations throughout the rest of the year. That's probably the most common approach that we see associations take. Second most common is just break even, pretty straightforward. What we put in and what we're going to get out, and we're going to really drive our revenues, our profits and whatnot to support programs through other initiatives. The other less common approach we've seen associations take is just to do it big. They're going to really spoil their members. They're going to have their annual conference at the Bellagio and have a very robust and expensive conference. That always was kind of the exception and not the rule, but it's become even more of the exception and not the rule in the last 5 years or so. And we occasionally see it for an anniversary celebration. But for the most part, 1 and 2 are where we see organizations land. Now, let's fast forward a little bit to 2020. So if unless you had your annual conference in January or February of 2020, you likely either had a virtual conference at no cost to your members, or you had your conference canceled altogether. So that really throws a wrench into, number one, making a profit on your conference, but then also number two, you're probably actually losing money at a virtual conference, because we did see a lot, not charge their members at all to attend those virtual conferences, at least in 2020. Now, over the last 3 years or so, we have seen that trend back to quote unquote normal. And I think the trend has been, 21 is in that hybrid or virtual realm, and then 22 starting to come back to life with more traditional conferences, depending upon time of year, location, and industry. With 23, I'll say being back to normal. But the one piece there, it's coming while it's coming back, it's not all the way back. And I think a couple of the struggles that our associations are facing is, what do our members want out of the annual conference? One association we work with made the comment that, you know what, we might not even offer it anymore because we don't know what, like, if our members they don't seem to care about it and don't want it like they used to. Another interesting trend that I saw was about 2 or 3 years ago when we were in this virtual or hybrid realm. We had some associations say, you know what, I don't know if we're ever going to go back to an on-site conference. But then, fast forward 2 years in this past audit cycle, for 12/31/2023 audits, I've heard comments saying, you know what, I don't know if we'll ever do another virtual or hybrid conference again, just because one of the cost, like from a true like dollars and cents piece, but then also the staff time. It got to the point where their staff is almost managing two separate conferences at the same time. Plus, it's costly, and it's not, again, going back to that first piece, not generating the revenue like they thought it was going to. So it's just been very interesting to listen to associations and kind of how they're responding to the various needs of their members. And I say all that on the negative side, but then there's others, and it's probably not coincidentally the membership-based orgs that I mentioned that are thriving right now. They've had their spring annual meetings, and they've never done better, record attendance and whatnot. So I do think a lot of it does come back to this membership piece and selling the value, and selling the membership, that value of the membership to your client base in order to help grow these other revenue streams. And others too. The other piece I want to highlight is, depending upon the industry, some have been just in going back to quote unquote normal faster than others. So, and it's really just some of it's driven by timing, and other pieces of it are driven by the industry in which they operate. And you can probably pick your stereotypes on who got back to going on site versus not trending to on site and being more virtual. And it probably rings true, and it just makes sense. Our medical based organizations very not, I don't want to say resistant, but very cautious with going back on site, and are late to adopt. There are also some that are also doing better as well from a membership based financial trends. But it's just been very interesting to see that the differences between industries within the association world. But again, it just goes back to what your membership base is looking for and wants. Then finally, the impact on other revenue streams. I don't have built into this presentation discussion necessarily on royalties or publications, advertising, the other common secondary revenue streams at associations, because just generally speaking, membership is really driving those secondary revenue streams. If you don't have the members, you don't have people attending conferences, you don't have people buying publications, and it all just kind of trickles down from there. Now, so I did put together some dues trends, and I mentioned the 40 associations that I work with annually before. I did pare that down a bit to be about 25 or so, just to get a little bit more precise numbers and trends, because some of those ones that are doing very well really skew the numbers here and kind of buck the just heavily influence this graph. And others too, we just haven't completed the 2023 work, or they're going through just different changes in operations that are really atypical. So, but yeah, this is just taking about 25 associations, taking their average dues and showing the trends over the last 5 years or so. And as you can see, kind of aligns with everything that I was saying, that decline or slow burn year over year. Here, no surprise with the pandemic, the impact that it had in this area at all, and even prior to the pandemic, some trends as well, some downward trends as well, and then kind of coming back. And when I put this together, I initially said, "Wow, it looks like we're coming back to pre-pandemic levels," which on the surface is true. But I think the one piece I didn't consider initially, and as I look at this more, is if we start at $1.7 million or so at 12/31/19, if we were looking to have even modest growth year over year of maybe 5% or so in membership dues revenue, we wouldn't be at 1.8, we'd be at 2.1, $2.2 million. So really about $400,000 behind on an average here. So just an not interesting trend necessarily, but what I expected to see. But the other piece to highlight here, and I alluded to earlier, is that this is revenue based. It's not membership count based. My bet would be if we looked at this from a membership count base from 2019 to 2023 and average number of members, we're probably seeing an overall decline just across the board, and just very much a trend that we've seen for most of the associations we work with. And I think in this space, these first 3 years here, the decline or modest growth, largely driven by organizations just freezing membership fees. They didn't want to increase, didn't want to put more financial stress during uncertain times of their members during the pandemic. But what we have seen, especially over the last 2 years or so, is just I don't want to say significant, but more significant than before, increases in dues rates just to make up for budget shortfalls and depletion of reserves that has occurred during the pandemic. And I think, just in speaking in broad strokes, in 2023, those dues increases that have come are probably outpacing, the dues increases we saw back in 2017, 2018 from an annual standpoint, because it's time to catch back up. So overall, just some interesting trends, and I'm sure a lot of you are feeling this within your membership base as well. All right, I'm going to move on now to systems modernization. And I think the next few slides kind of are all somewhat intertwined here. But this is some of the more behind the scenes pieces and trends on the ops side that we're seeing with associations. And the pandemic popping up again here. What we saw with associations going back 6-7 years ago is very paper-based associations, from the way payroll was run and reports were a mail sent to the finance team and process, to invoices being paid, checks being cut, deposits being processed. If we're going to an audit, we're sitting in a conference room with a stack of papers that we received for about a week at a time. The pandemic certainly changed that. Some of it just very basic. It's like, we have to social distance. We can't be around each other. So we have one person going to the office. Now everything's scanned to a PDF and saved on a network file. That's pretty, the bare minimum. We've seen all of our associations go through that process. But I think where we saw some additional trends was in the bill pay side of the house, and the revenue coming in too, where saw a lot of associations trend towards the bill.coms of the world, or some other equivalent expense approval module and payment module, or just leaning on the financial institutions bill pay to pay specific bills and just eliminate that check cutting process as part of the annual the weekly check run. So saw a lot of that. And then also too, again, with the social distancing piece, just encouraging a lot of their members to make payments online via the secure web portal, register for conferences on a portal, send items to a lockbox, all of those things. So the pandemic really changed that for a lot of the associations that we work with. So that's, so that was what, 4 years ago now that we saw a lot of that change starting to happen. Now the change that we're starting to see is less on the, the day-to-day operations piece, and more on the actual accounting side of the house. So there are a lot of accounting systems and AMSs that are just being sunset right now, as there's this overall trend to move to the cloud. I'd say the lion's share of the associations that we're working with are using one of QuickBooks, Sage, Microsoft Dynamics / I always call it Great Plains, and then NetForum. Between those four, and with QuickBooks and Sage being the most common. But a lot of those systems are sunsetting their desktop version of things, in the sense that, here's the 2024 version. You're not getting a 2025, and we're not going to support 2024 after X amount of years. And so that's forcing a lot of, and this isn't association specific either, just forcing a lot of organizations to look at their accounting systems and look at that cloud-based version and see, does this still make sense for us? Anyone on this call who has used QuickBooks before and moved from desktop to online knows, it's still QuickBooks, but things are in different places. Functionality is different. There's some things you can now do that you weren't able to do with desktop and vice versa. And I think a lot of our associations are like going through this process and saying, you know what, do we really want to, keep up with QuickBooks? Is this something where we want to, switch our accounting platform because it's not meeting our needs anymore, or we just don't like the functionality of it? So, that's a lot of what our associations are going through right now as they go through this kind of their hand being forced to make these switches. And on the other side, I'm not picking on QuickBooks, so it does serve its purpose for a lot of our clients. But on the other side, we have associations that implemented Dynamics, or maybe a more of a Cadillac type accounting software 10 years ago or so, when the association looked a lot different. And now, both from a finance team side, but also from a membership based side. And now they're like, you know what? They're forcing us to go to either their new system or into the cloud. This doesn't make sense for us anymore. Let's make that switch to QuickBooks or to a smaller system. So we are seeing a lot of those considerations. And I think pretty much everyone is going through this right now of having to make a switch in their accounting system. With that too, I mentioned bundling of products here. And what I mean by that is, I think the general approach that we're seeing is that the accounting system, the finance system, is what's driving a lot of the change here. And so an organization may say, hey, you know what, I want to switch to Sage Intacct. All right, IT vendor, or reaching out to us even and saying, hey, what works best for us from a bill payment module standpoint? What integrates best with Intacct, and how do we, is it bill.com? Is it Ramp? Is it Divvy? Is it a mix of both? We want to incorporate that too into whatever accounting system we have. Similarly, looking at the revenue databases as well. And I'd say just in my experience and with based off of what our clients have told us, a lot of those expense modules integrate well. There's still yet to be a revenue database that I've encountered with our clients where they'll say, you know what, this is the best thing ever. It works well for me. It works well for our membership department. It integrates, streamlines things. It's great. I'd say pretty much everyone that we've encountered has either membership loves it and accounting hates it, or vice versa. Or there's just pieces that they don't like and there's hiccups there. So I think there's still an untapped market for that hopefully comes full circle and gets integrated into not only the not-for-profit world, but the association specific world soon. But I think a lot of associations are looking for that streamlining of processes, just because, and it's probably a good transition to our next slide soon. Staffing's at a premium, especially on the finance side, in the association world, the small association world. And so anything you all can do to help streamline things, eliminate redundancies as it relates to filing of invoices, processing payments, sending out dues invoices to members, I think it's certainly something to evaluate and look at, because it's, there may be an upfront cost and maybe some routine maintenance cost, but it can save you a lot of time as well on the back end. The other caveat, and I don't have it built in here, is everything does come at a cost. And it's really, I don't have necessarily a price range to give anyone on this call on what it takes to, purchase new software and go through this overhaul of your association management system. There are some that we've worked with where they're just focusing on the accounting side, and that cost is $50,000, $100,000, whatever the number may be, because they're moving to a more robust system. Others I've seen a couple $100,000 with a complete overhaul of implementing Intacct and Salesforce and Bill.com and a new payroll provider that's all integrated in one. So it's really going to vary on like how much you want to do and how much you want to modify some of these softwares as well. The last piece on this slide with other technology considerations, this is just speaking in broad strokes for the most part about just being aware of IT security and trends. Going back 3 years ago, probably 4 years ago now even, one of our common comments was, consider an annual cybersecurity training. I know some insurance providers either provide you a discount or a credit if you host that annual training with your staff on your cyber insurance premiums. But I think even if you're not getting that, I still think it's very important to consider, at least on an annual basis, that you're making yourself and staff aware of the threats. 5 years ago, the threats were there. Still, I know we were getting those emails where it's, hey, Joe Smith, can you send me, can you go buy $50 worth of gift cards and send them to me ASAP? That was happening, but now they're getting more ramped up, more targeted, more savvy. AI is getting incorporated into them. And we have seen, there's one organization I work with where it was a very sophisticated scheme where a hacker came in, looked like it was coming from a very trusted source. The email looks legit, almost hacked into the vendor's email to get to our client, and our client lost a couple $100,000 of a payment that they were due. They ended up getting it back, but the hoops that they had to jump through to get it and the premiums they had to pay was kind of a nightmare. So just being up to date on the cybersecurity side, and I don't think it can hurt at least on an annual basis to have your either in-house IT or your external IT consultant take a look at your systems, make sure you're up to date, and maybe I know there's cost considerations with this as well, but just maybe conducting some mock threats and whatnot on an annual basis just to see how you stand up against the most current threats impacting organizations. All right, moving on to the staffing trends part of the presentation. I want to kick this off by just highlighting the loyalty of association finance staff, because I think that trickles down then to the rest here. But I'd say just in general of the associations that we work with that have in-house accountants, they've been there for 10, 15, 20 years, which you don't see all that often anymore. And it's very interesting to see too that the ones that we do have that have outsourced their accounting function to a new bookkeeper CPA firm, they came in and replaced someone who had been there for a while. And I think in my mind, the traditional throwback association finance director right now is someone who started at the association, maybe on the program side, maybe as an AP clerk in the finance team, whatever it may be, and just work their way up. And they're maybe they were the only one that had taken an accounting class back in the day, or they did the books for their mom and dad's business 30, 40 years ago, and now here they are 30 years later, managing the finances of an association because they just kind of stumbled into that role and have done well. And so we do see a lot of that, but the one piece we don't see then is the next them. If Joe Smith is the individual leading finance right now, his successor Julie just isn't in the door right now, and I think there's a few reasons for that. One, there's aren't as many people going into accounting, and so with that, the accounting teams of our clients that we work with that have the accounting and finance function in house just are very lean and or turning over on a regular basis. You don't need to hear me preach about the shortage in the staffing pipeline at the CPA firms, but I think that does trickle down to these two associations where it's like, yeah, there's the people, the trend in public accounting to be there for a few years, learn your way, and then go into industry, go into the not-for-profit world, the association world. That's just not happening as much anymore. And so if we're not getting it, you all aren't feeling it as well. The other piece is the association finance directors, controllers, whatever the role we want to call it is, they wear a lot of hats. So not only are they the director of finance, they're also the head of HR. They're also head of operations for whatever reason. Sometimes they also, if there's a leaky pipe in the basement, they're the ones who get called and say, hey, what should we do about this? For whatever reason that may be, they have to wear a lot of hats. And with that, as these individuals phase out and job descriptions and whatnot get built and resumes are sent out, the job it's not just an accounting job. You're appealing to the accounting side and just the general operations side. And there's not a lot of candidates that are fitting both those roles. And I know I gave some extreme examples there, but those are just some examples that we do see within our client base. So I think that's another piece of it too, where the leanness of associations in the not-for-profit world in general does play a factor there. But what we have seen a larger trend towards is that outsourcing function, outsourcing the accounting, accounting and just finance team in general to a full external CPA firm to run payroll, record transactions within the books, as well on a daily, weekly basis. And I don't have it on here, and I think there's some individuals on this call who are in this realm as well, but there's also the full outsourcing of everything to a management company. And we typically see that in smaller associations. There are some larger ones that fall under this model as well, but just sending the whole back office to an external management company to manage the day-to-day. We have seen that as well. So those are some of the trends that we're seeing with the retirement of finance leads. And I always go back to that caveat. What's the answer to this of addressing the retirement of these individuals? It really depends, because I can give you like success and horror stories on both the outsourcing and bringing someone in-house realm. And maybe just to go down that path for a sec, there was an organization that we worked with, and prior to us getting there, they did have a long-standing association, internal financial person. That individual left to retire, and couldn't find anyone immediately. So they're like, you know what, we're going to try the outsourcing model to a CPA firm down the road. Did not work out for them. It was a disaster for a number of reasons. One being some additional leadership change, but they're like, we'll never do that again. We're bringing someone in-house. And they went through a couple of candidates that also didn't work out, but they found someone on the in-house side who was absolutely perfect for that association. They do great work, excellent work, and it's the absolute perfect fit. They really lucked out in finding this individual, and that approach worked for them. Conversely, I've seen people say, we're never going to do the outsourcing piece, so we're going to hire internally. And they've hired an internal finance team, and those individuals haven't worked out, largely because there's that wearing a lot of hats and being stretched too thin, or they couldn't find qualified candidates to check all of the boxes. And so what I've seen with a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, but maybe a more recent and positive trend on two associations that I can think of in the outsourcing realm is they've taken that that finance role of this individual who's wearing a lot of hats, and they've evaluated and spliced it, and they've sent the true accounting finance piece to a new outsourced bookkeeper, a new CPA firm to handle all of that, but then also carved out a new role on the operations side. So almost created like an operations director equivalent role where they can work with the fundraising team, work with the development team, the program team, and with that, bridge that gap between finances and programs, while also helping just operate smoothly and efficiently. And I can think of two associations recently within the last 6 to 8 months or so that have taken that model and are finding great success in using that model. And it's interesting. One of the associations that I mentioned there, I was going to use the other one as an example, but there was another association that reached out yesterday to me that is actually going down that route where they brought someone in-house, just didn't work out, and now they're kind of splicing those roles and just relying heavy on the CPA firm to handle that finance and day-to-day. So it goes back to, it really depends on what you're looking for from your CPA firm, from your finance director, and does it make sense to have that as an outsourced CPA firm or an in-house accountant? And it's just evaluating your needs and making a decision from there. From a governance standpoint, and with governance referring a little bit to more so to the board of directors and the governance at that level, how involved we see boards really varies depending upon the size of the organization and what's happening at the association. So just to speak in broad strokes, smaller the association, the more involved governance tends to be, specifically the treasurer and just the officers of the association. And then the larger, the more hands-off they are. Those larger associations with the board, they still are involved with setting CEO compensation, approving the budget on an annual basis, making strategic decisions, but they're not really involved in the day-to-day like some of the smaller associations that we work with are, where if there's 2 or 3 people, there may be there's just some requirement for governance to be a little bit more involved with making some day-to-day, month-to-month decisions. Common example, probably regardless, is just approval of the CEO or executive director's credit card reports. Something as simple as that we see a lot in our small to mid-sized boards. But the one thing I do want to highlight, I mentioned the management company model before, where the back office, even like the executive director roles, kicked to an external third party. That model works great. And I've been fortunate throughout my career to work with a lot of great management companies, and luckily have never ever had an issue here. But we have come on in the past where, ABC management company that we're working with took over a client from XYZ management company, and XYZ management company wasn't doing what they were supposed to do, or was just acting fraudulently and essentially stealing from the organization and bleeding them dry. And that was just due to governance, being a little too hands off and not really focusing on the finances and whatnot on a monthly basis, not even looking at a financial statement, a bank statement, anything like that. So I think I don't know if it's a word of caution, but if you are going to outsource everything to a third party in that management company realm, the governance just does have to keep an eye on the financials at a basic level, just to make sure everything makes sense and things are trending as expected. The last two pieces here I want to touch on with remote employees and lease considerations, they're somewhat intertwined here. Have seen an explosion, I'll call it, of remote employees over the past few years. Again, not unique to the association world. Where Wagner sits today in 2024 is very different from a remote workforce than we were back in 2019. But I think there's just three main things to consider there as you expand your employee workforce. One just goes back to the IT and cybersecurity piece, making sure they're well trained and well aware of the constant threats and whatnot that could happen to them. Especially newer employees, making sure they know the appropriate means of communication and how people communicate, because those are the easy targets when they first start for external hackers. Two, just doing what you can engulf them in the culture of the association, get them up to speed and just comfortable within the association. But that's not any different than a new employee starting in general. But then three, where our mind always goes is on the compliance side. It's just making sure you're well aware of the rules and regulations of employment law and taxes and whatnot, where that employee sits. So if you're a Wisconsin-based association and now you have someone in Colorado, California, Texas, wherever it may be, making sure you're consulting with either your HR director, your HR consultant, external HR legal counsel, someone to make sure you have all of your bases covered as relates to local compliance. Because there's not only the tax piece, but there's just varying HR law across the country of how much PTO you have to let employees accrue, have to offer to employees pay out, take on an annual basis, or even nuanced pieces of, hey, if we're terminating Joe Smith today at noon, we have to pay him his last paycheck by tomorrow at 5 p.m. A lot of different things there to consider, and how it, if it infects one employee in California, it might infect the rest of your workforce in Wisconsin. So just making sure when you're making that jump, you're talking with the right individuals before exploring that option. Then lastly, with lease considerations, I'd say the general trend that we've seen recently is associations moving back towards having space if they went virtual, or if they had pre-existing space, downsizing. I think, again, rewinding 5 years ago, if an association had a lease in place and it lapsed during the pandemic, I'd say a good amount just said, we're going to ride this out. We're going to let it term. We'll be virtual for a time being, and then we'll see where we're at, a year from now to see if a virtual makes sense. Others try to get bought out of it, at least, or make a prepayment penalty to varying success. But I say just in general, associations that were operating virtual are trending back towards having some sort of space. And maybe it's not that a robust office, maybe it's just like a WeWork or WeWork equivalent type space in a specific city, or if they're in a space that could accommodate 30 people, they've downsized now to a space that accommodates 10. And that kind of goes back to how associations now just look different than they did 10 years ago with that accounting system consideration of, hey, we had this accounting system where we're moving towards it because it doesn't meet our needs anymore, towards a different one because it doesn't meet our needs anymore. Same thing with leases. A lot of people are just restructuring how they're organized in specific cities. The last piece I'll touch on is lobbying. With the caveat here, I do work with a lot of nationally based associations, but I think it still stands true at the state and local level. But just have seen an increased focus in lobbying over the past few years. I think there's a few reasons for that. One, just more and more legislation impacting a lot of just different groups where the National Association is now taking the lead on lobbying for its members' rights and members' needs overall. That's one. And two, just seeing associations just getting a little bit more proactive on things just to show that value to members. But the bigger piece that I've seen are these special assessments, and some of it's in the lobbying realm, some of it's in like the advocacy realm or just general support realm. But in the national space, there are times we've seen where there's a law that's going in place in New York that, hey, we're going to lobby against, we're going to ask you for some more special assessments to pay our lobbyists for, because if this gets passed in New York, it's going to get passed in California, Illinois, pick another state. And so, hey, members, can you help us support this cause? And so we've seen an increase in those special assessments, often seem called special projects within our client base, both in that realm, same in the advocacy realm, just trying to advocate on behalf and maybe not lobby necessarily for the industry. Those special assessments are supporting that as well as the other example I'll give is I've seen one of our associations get sued for a very frivolous lawsuit overall. Then the mental gymnastics the person suing had to go through to get from A to B is quite incredible, but it really did impact all their members. And so they're like, hey, we need these guys, we need these special assessments. Please help us out, help support us. And with that, they actually got some additional members because of those special assessments, as they were able to share their value to the membership base. Lastly, political action committees. This is the have seen them become more active. We still work with some associations where the PAC is very inactive, but I've seen the creation of more PACs recently. And just speaking in broad strokes here, we see PACs be very active during election years, inactive or just not as active in non-election years. And an interesting trend I saw as we've gone through our 2023 audits is we saw the peak in 2022, expect to see a valley in 2023. And while there still are valleys in a dip, those valleys aren't as deep as they were in 21, not as deep as 2019. There's actually an association we worked with where the PAC had more political contributions in and out in 23 than it did in 2022, which was interesting. But just given the overall politically charged environment that we're constantly operating in the last 8 to 10 years or so, not necessarily a surprise, but that is something that we've seen a trend on with a lot of our associations are those PACs becoming more and more active. And the last piece to highlight there too is as those become more active, and if you do have a PAC, just keep in mind there could be some filing requirements that you get kicked into gear if your PAC starts to have a lot more activity than it traditionally has. So with that, I wanted to leave about 10 minutes worth of time for any questions that could come up, and it looks like we're right at that 10 minutes. So does anyone have any specific questions for me?
Thanks, Anna. We did have one question come in from Carol. She's asking, we want to do some fundraising for 501c6 as part of community outreach to our 501c3 community charities. What are the restrictions on the fundraising in Texas? Can we do silent auctions or wine pools, or what else is allowed under Texas or federal laws for a 501c6?
Great question. And Carol, maybe you can reach out to me separately because I don't know the nuance of Texas, fundraising law. I'll just, maybe speaking a little bit, and I'm happy to look into it more for you. But just speaking in broad strokes here, the way it essentially works is if you look at your Form 990, let's just say you were going to conduct one of those activities that you suggested, that would be classified as a fundraising activity on your Schedule G. And if you look at the Internal Revenue Code, if Texas allows that, great. There's nothing that you have to register, and there's nothing else that you'd have to do. From a tax standpoint, you report it just like you were as a 501c3 organization. But if you're quote unquote breaking the law in Texas and you're soliciting these auction items and whatnot without having an auction license or a fundraising license, raffle license within the state of Texas, the IRS would consider that to be unrelated business income and you would be taxed on it. But I'd be happy to look into that more for you, Carol, but I don't have a specific answer because that's very specific to Texas.
The next question is, can you share a bit about what kinds of associations are in the data set? When you presented the dues trend graph, maybe the size of staff members, overall revenue, or industries?
Sure, maybe I'll go back a little bit here and I'll speak to that a little bit more. Oops. So here's the size. So we're looking at assets ranging from 300K to 20 million. Revenue from 100K to 17 million. And I mentioned this before, from a number of members, that's a piece I do not have that information for. I mean, we have some that are in the couple hundred, we have some that are in the thousands, multiple thousands. But the industries that we're operating within, primarily, I would say academia. So a lot of individuals who are professors at various schools. That's a big one. That makes up a significant portion of our base, client base, or our membership base. But then outside of that, I don't know, if I looked at that list of 40 or so associations that we're working with, there's probably 25 to 30, probably closer to 25, just different subsets overall of industries. And there's not a specific association industry that we're focusing on. And that, yeah, I spend a lot of time in the DC area in Old Town Alexandria, and you walk up and down the street and there's nothing but associations there, and there's truly an association for everything. So we haven't targeted a specific niche or group within the association world right now. So we're kind of working with a wide variety. Then maybe just the last piece here, that from a staff size, I'd say on average, the staffs that we see are in that 10 to 15-ish people range. We have some that are, 2 or 3 people, others that are 50 plus. But I'd say for the most part, the size of the associations we're working with are probably in that 10 to 15 individuals range.
That is all I have for questions now, but we've got a few minutes left. So if anybody thinks of another one, please feel free to throw it in the Q&A. Otherwise, thank you, Adam, for sharing your expertise. We really appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us today. We hope you found this information helpful. We've got some other great trainings coming up soon. So if you're subscribed to our email list, you'll get those updates in your inbox, or you can keep an eye on our website at wagnercpas.com under upcoming events. Adam has his contact information up here on the screen for you to reach out later if anything comes up. And you will be getting that information also later today in your email, a copy of that. And we did just have another question come in. Tracy is asking, are there any limitations, restrictions, or reporting requirements for a 501c6 with lobbying activities? I'm more familiar with the 501c3 requirements, so would love to hear more.
Sure, and Tracy, I'll do my best to give you the crash course on 501c6 lobbying here. And if you have additional follow-up questions, I'm happy to illustrate it more with the Form 990 up. But the long and short of it is, typically what we see is an association will solicit to its members and say, all right, here's your membership dues, and I'll make it somewhat straightforward here. Your membership dues are $1,000, and of that $1,000, 10%, $100 is going to be used towards lobbying. Okay, so you collect dues from everyone throughout the year, and so you have, I'm not going to do mental math right now, but let's just say after all those, after you've collected all those dues, you have $30,000 or so that you have $30,000 or so that you can use towards lobbying. At that point, you can, if you only spend $20,000, great. You overcharge your members for lobbying. They can't deduct that $100 for lobbying on their personal tax returns. But let's just say you have $30,000 of you carry over excess lobbying, where there's more lobbying was conducted than you actually withheld from your members. You can carry that forward to a subsequent year, or you can just pay tax on it. So if you said you were going to only lobby for $20,000, but $30,000 of lobbying was incurred, you'd have to pay either tax on that $10,000, or you can carry that $10,000 forward and correct it on your next dues assessment with your members. So it's just a matter of how much you're communicating to members as of their dues as being used for lobbying, and then from there that gives you the pot of money to play with.
We'll take this final question that came in from Michael. He's wondering if you've noticed any trends with 501c6s and philanthropy in the past 5 years. As an example, more or less reliance on foundation grants versus membership dues.
Yeah, I can't think of a whole lot of associations in the C6 world that are receiving foundation grants. Some in our C3 membership orgs are, but I do think associations are are scrapping to find different ways to not rely on membership dues as much. I should pull this up. I think, for the most part, as I look at our clients over here, most of them are, probably 40 to 50, if not more % supported by dues. Other revenues, dues are making up that amount of their total operating budget. And so it's, just trying to find anything and everything to appeal to members more. And I don't have a good answer for you. I think dues are still the main driver. We do have some where the conferences are driving the annual revenue and the annual budget, but those are few and far between.
All right. Thanks again, everybody. We look forward to having you all join us again soon. Thanks and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.